First Reformed is a 2017 film written and directed by Paul Schrader, who is probably best known as the writer of Taxi Driver. It is, I think, one of the most provocative and ballsy English-language, studio-backed films of this era in cinema that I've seen.
What a blessedness, what a peace is mine, leaning on the everlasting.
The brief summary is this. The film follows Protestant minister Ernst Toller, played by Ethan Hawke, first as he begins to journal his thoughts and despair, and then as he begins to question perhaps not so much his faith, but efficacy and self, and then as he becomes radicalized. Really, First Reformed is impossible for me to talk about without spoilers and, indeed, a synopsis, so pause this video now while you examine the source material, perhaps. Toller is a 46-year-old divorced, isolated, lost man. When he was a military chaplain some years previously, he encouraged his only son to follow in the family tradition and join the military. His son was killed in Iraq shortly after, and his marriage and life quickly disintegrated. When we join Toller, he is sort of the black sheep of an evangelical, mega-church type organization. He's an active part of it, but his church is a 250-year-old, historically significant building with a tiny congregation, and his role as its reverend is more that of a tour guide and caretaker. His boss, Pastor Joel Jeffers, is especially concerned with the looming reconsecration service for the First Reformed Church.
What do they like to call it over there where you are? The museum?
They call it the souvenir shop.
One of Toller's parishioners, Mary, asks him to counsel her husband, Michael, who is in great emotional distress and possibly a manic or depressive episode. Michael wants Mary to abort their baby, as he thinks it's wrong to bring a child into a decaying world. Toller, of course, argues with this, but this scene sees Michael steer the conversation to environmental and subsequent social collapse, and, I would argue, subtly positions Michael as the preacher and Toller as, let's say, the listener.
In 2010, the IPCC predicted that if drastic action wasn't taken by 2015, environmental collapse would be irreversible. They were gunned down in 2011 in the Amazon. As Dorothy Stang, 2005, she was a nun from Ohio. That this social structure can't bear the stress of multiple crises.
Wisdom is holding two contradictory truths in our mind simultaneously. Hope and despair.
Later, Mary alerts Toller to her discovery of a suicide vest in her and Michael's garage, which Toller decides to take and hide. After arranging to meet Michael, Toller finds him dead from a self-inflicted gunshot. In accordance with Michael's will, Toller leads a service where Michael's ashes are scattered at an EPA Superfund site, a place of environmental catastrophe. It seems that this is where Toller, after stirring since his first and only conversation with Michael, finally wakes, or, if you like, is activated.
Who's gonna take on the big machine?
Going through Michael's laptop, Toller realizes that one of his church's biggest donors, Edward Bulk of Bulk Industries, is a prolific polluter and key backer in the First Reformed's refurbishment and, it's been 250 years and the governor's here too, bonanza. Toller briefly meets with Pastor Jeffers and Bulk, and a disagreement occurs.
It was a political act. And you and the choir represented the Abundant Life Church. And the Handstown site, by the way, isn't even polluted. It was cleaned up with EPA Superfunds.
But this isn't politics. I mean, what God wants.
Oh,
is for
you know the mind of God? I understand. You're upset. I mean, you found the body, correct?
Yes.
You counseled him, then he shot himself.
Yes. Take a look at your own life before you criticize others.
Toller, battling alcoholism, and I mean Georgie Best dipping bread into a bowl of whiskey for breakfast sort of alcoholism, faces not only a crisis of conviction, but also one of health. He discovers that he may have stomach cancer. When meeting alone with Pastor Jeffers, his boss again is more concerned with the ever closer big shindig, physically turns away from Toller when he tries to debate the church's position, or lack of one, on environmental concerns, and even suggests that climate change and environmental collapse may be part of God's plan.
The creation waits in eager expectation of liberation from bondage.
So we should pollute so God can restore. We should sin so God can forgive. I don't think that's what the apostle meant.
You don't live in the real world.
Right.
You don't. You are a minister at a tourist church that no one attends. Who is that priest that you like so much?
Thomas Merton.
Thomas Merton. He didn't live in the real world either.
Yes, he did.
No, he was a monk who lived in a monastery in Kentucky and wrote books.
Despite growing closer to Mary, now a pregnant widow, Toller continues to become generally more isolated, more distressed by the life he leads and the reality he occupies, and decides he's going to use Michael's suicide vest to, putting it lightly, ruin First Reform's 250th anniversary, and I suppose more specifically, Edward Balk's freshly dry-cleaned suit. Its ending is ambiguous, although I read it as Toller deciding not to go through with it and instead just killing himself. The film is open to interpretation, and I think you could make a reasonable argument that more than just its finale is Toller fantasizing. From just my synopsis, maybe you could argue that its meaning or message could be the dangers of radicalization, where a rational, even upstanding person might take up a just cause to do something terribly unjust, namely murder a roomful of people. But with the tone and subtext continually reinforcing images of hypocrisy, the mention of Jose Claudio Ribeiro da Silva and Mario do Espirito, two real people who were murdered for their environmental activism, the real concerns voiced by a frantic and desperate Michael, the film feels very much on Toller's side, not necessarily in his choice of actions, but in doing something, in making a stand of some sort. Consider this. Toller was an army chaplain. He was a flag waver. His son died in an oil war that he himself describes as morally unjustifiable. People in his organization call his church the souvenir shop, and it does not serve primarily as a house of worship. Bulk is poisoning the earth for profit, but is not only welcomed into church activity, but allowed to steer it, to dictate terms, to become anointed and worthy by way of money. Toller's boss is just a businessman, more interested in the numbers and plastering his face wherever he can, who serves up soothing platitudes and tells people not to worry, when they should, really, be very worried.
Fretting arises from our determination to have our own way. Our Lord never worried and was never anxious.
Toller's work with the youth is expressed as working with the naive and unprepared, and the angry, selfish, and xenophobic.
there's a lot of church people, good Christians, who see a connection between godliness and prosperity. But that's not what Jesus teaches.
Why stand for anything? Take prayer out of the schools. Give money to people too lazy to work for it. Whatever you do, don't offend the Muslims.
When Toller goes to the megachurch's cafeteria, decked out like a corporate restaurant, the hypocrisy of the writing on the wall, of sharing everything, is clear. Confronted with his own failing health, Toller perhaps realizes that he has made no difference to the world. He has done what everyone else has done. He has gone along with it and hoped for better. But then he learns something that shakes him to the core. Not that climate change is real, or that the world is going to be much worse quite soon, but that people don't want the truth, they want the lie. I would say the film is unashamedly environmentalist, even teetering on the edge of, sort of maybe, not really, but you know, advocating action. But not just that. Two important elements are easily overlooked. First Reform's Ernst Toller is named after this Ernst Toller. He was a German Jew, veteran of World War I, a playwright, poet, and revolutionary. In 1919, he became the first president of the short-lived breakaway Bavarian Soviet Republic. After the revolution was crushed, he was exiled from Germany and lived in America before killing himself in 1939. I cannot imagine the character being named Ernst Toller is a coincidence. The second is Thomas Merton, who is mentioned as an influence on the film's Toller and is even quoted by him.
I know that nothing can change, and I know there is no hope. Thomas Merton wrote this.
Merton was an American Trappist monk and a prolific author. Some consider him radical, socialist, or Marxist. Maybe you could call him a humanist. He was, for sure, an ardent pacifist and proponent of interfaith dialogue. He once wrote in a letter, "The world is full of great criminals with enormous power, and they are in a death struggle with each other. It is a huge gang battle, using well-meaning lawyers and policemen and clergymen as their front, controlling papers, means of communication, and enrolling everybody in their armies." In later life, while maintaining his pacifistic beliefs, Merton considered himself an anarchist. So does Toller's backing out of his explosive stand come from Merton's influence as a pacifist or as a defeatist? Or both? Or neither? Or does Jeffers' assertion that Merton didn't live in the real world prompt Toller to commit to violence in the first place? Or, with its ambiguity, did Toller actually do it, and the final moments of First Reformed are simply dying thoughts? Or did Toller choose the advice he gave to Michael, holding on to contradicting hope and despair at the same time? Are Toller, the real Toller, and Merton ultimately rejected by film Toller? Are they that relevant at all? What is the relevance of the naming conventions? Michael and Mary, Toller's dead son was Joseph, all biblical names, but Ernst is not. Is that just thematic? Whatever the political and or religious messaging, for me, the broad meaning is clear. Greed, selfishness, complacency are leading us to a disaster that is really already here, and it will take only half the time it took to start lapping at our knees to reach our neck. Did Toller blow himself up? Is that the sort of action needed for change? Is that just murder? What change would that really spark? What will it take? Is it just pointless and the only thing we can do is to hang on? the film succeeds in posing these questions and eliciting that sort of internal debate, sort of in a way where I could totally see how some people would watch it and cheer on Toller's plan. Not me though, I agree with Michael, I'm just not as upset about it. I'm just visiting, I'm not going to have any kids, don't get sad, lean into it even. Let's all smoke cigars made out of boron. Let's go wild. Asbestos? I'd love some, thank you. I'd be remiss not to talk about the technical details. Presented in a 4:3 aspect ratio, which really adds to the claustrophobic tone, the framing anticipates the newer trend of reversed headroom imbalance. What I mean is, traditionally you'd see singular subjects framed like this, not like this, unless something was happening in the space behind them, usually related to them, like a jump scare, or someone sneaking up behind the subject. This is something I don't particularly like in TV and film from the last 5 or so years, that use it without clear reason and I think overuse it. But in First Reformed it was quite fresh, and is employed with meaning. It contributes to an off-kilter atmosphere where things feel sickly odd. The framing throughout is sometimes symmetrical, sometimes not quite, and I perceive that as very intentional. In the scene with Toller counselling Michael, Michael is slightly and deliberately positioned closer to the camera and taking up more of the frame, and hand in hand with blocking, where Michael is leaning forward with his sleeves rolled up, contrasted with Toller tucked away in a low chair. It reinforces the scene's subtext of Michael reversing the roles and teaching or schooling Toller. The film's colour palette is mostly quite monochromatic, with a good deal of contrast between very dark and very light, and the outdoor scenes are often overcast. But I think even more important to the atmosphere is the crispness. That makes everything feel isolating, emotionally sterile, and in the megachurch interiors, soulless and corporate. The Albany that Toller occupies seems a far cry from the natural earth he ends up advocating for. More like a purgatory where nature and abundant life fears to tread, as well as captivating, haunting diegetic choir singing. Brian Williams's sparingly used but deeply evocative moody score further emphasizes the tone and possibly indicates changes to Toller's psychology or even perception of reality. In summation, it is a highly considered, ambiguous but meaningful film that does indeed bear some comparison to Taxi Driver's script, but feels naturally much more mature. That's not a criticism of Taxi Driver, but a compliment to First Reformed. Although far less known than Taxi Driver, I think First Reformed might well be Paul Schrader's masterpiece.
Can God forgive us?
Will God forgive us?
What a great movie. Luckily, all of the concerns addressed in First Reformed have since been addressed. So it's all over. Everything's great. We're all going to heaven, lads. Way. Thanks for watching. Consider supporting this sponsor-free channel on Patreon, where you can get these videos a weekish early. Or don't. Whatever. Whatever you like. We'll have a wallow. We'll have a laugh. See you next time. Stay warm or cool. Bye-bye.